Warhammer 40,000 is about to become the most important franchise in Hollywood entertainment. And while some experts or introduction videos on YouTube might claim there is no easy way to get into Warhammer, there absolutely is. Speaking as somebody who struggled for weeks, maybe even months to get my bearings in the universe, this is going to be the intro video that I wish I had watched before diving in. Not only laying out the main Warhammer timeline to get a sense of where it begins and where it ends, but highlighting the most important characters and events along the way, as well as the key terms that you'll need to know before you can even dream of starting to tab your way through the wiki. If you've seen the iconic armored space marines that Warhammer is famous for, it might be easy to assume that it isn't all that different from something like StarCraft, Halo, or a dozen other sci-fi series. But trust me when I tell you that its premise, its characters, and its lore make it hands down the coolest in all of modern fiction. And whether you're watching this video because of the video games, the Amazon TV show, or Henry Cavill's plans for a blockbuster cinematic universe, you are just moments away from discovering science fantasy's best-kept secret. And best of all, you don't need to buy, build, or hand-paint any tabletop figures to start enjoying it. So, what makes Warhammer more powerful, more epic, or more awesome than Star Wars, Marvel, or any other fictional franchise? That all has to do with 40K's secret weapon. Because universes like Game of Thrones or Star Wars can dominate one genre, like fantasy or science fiction, but 40K has broken the mold in a way no other franchise has managed to pull off. You want highbrow, King Arthur-esque medieval fantasy? Warhammer has that. You'd rather have a brutal, post-apocalyptic hellscape that makes Mad Max seem civilized? Warhammer has that too. It also has pulse-pounding sci-fi military campaigns, the rich culture of its own version of glorious Viking sagas, and the most disturbing body horror that you could possibly imagine. Even the ceremony and grandeur of ancient Rome are not only possible within the Warhammer 40K universe, but these are all central and ongoing parts of its core story. So how would I best explain what Warhammer 40,000 really is? It's the epic, glorious, and emotional fantasy of the Lord of the Rings, but expanded out to the universal scale of Dune. Its main character is a tortured hero like Geralt of Rivia, who rises to lead a galactic empire leveled up to become the most powerful immortal sorcerer in existence. Now add in a massive army of bioengineered Master Chief super soldiers, fighting wars against vicious alien xenomorphs, pushing back against a race of dark and mysterious space elves, while also recruiting psychic warriors to do battle against a million-strong army of demonic Sith. Put all of that together, and you are still just scratching the surface of a regular day inside the Warhammer 40K universe. Now, it obviously sounds too good to be true, but once you see it for yourselves, you will understand why it can often take just a single sentence, a single image, or just a single idea for someone to realize that Warhammer is the kind of lore they've waited their entire life to discover. Yes, the lore and plots connecting all of these elements could be complicated for beginners, but that just gives us our mission for this video. First, we have to start with the Emperor of Mankind and explain the origin of the franchise's main character. Then we'll explain how our world, yes, our world, slowly turns into Warhammers over the next 20,000 years, including the unbelievably epic story of how the Emperor unites all of Earth into one human empire. Then we'll cover the creation of those famous Space Marines, as well as their Horus Heresy that everyone keeps talking about, all before arriving at the current setting of the Warhammer universe in the year 40,000. The grimdark future in which there is only war. Of all the most used tropes in fantasy, there is nothing I love more than the rise of a king. Whether they were secretly born to inherit the crown, or prove their worthiness by avoiding it until it's absolutely necessary to protect their people. So I don't take it lightly when saying, the Emperor of Mankind is the most interesting and complex version of the archetype that I have ever encountered. All the glory of a golden-armored living saint, paired with the divine wrath of an avenging angel. But also the warmth of a loving parent, stretching out his arms across the universe to hold the entire human race within his protection. And if that sounds too perfect, his equally immortal allies and lieutenants often admit to disagreeing with almost all of his decisions, acknowledging that the brutal, horrifying means the Empire employs to justify his ends, some of which might not even be necessary at all. In short, he has all the power and wisdom of a god, but with all the flaws and regrets of a human. Which is why it was so confusing to dig into the modern lore and realize the Emperor doesn't seem all that important to the story. But there's a very good reason for this, which should really be explained first. In the current setting of Warhammer 40,000 in the year 40,000, the Emperor is basically on life support, with his superhuman healing powers effectively maxed out, as his followers use him as a psychic battery to power the Empire. It's a cool idea, but after thousands of years with no changes, it's not a very exciting one. If you grew up or joined the hobby with this comatose emperor, then he might not seem too important to the grand scheme. But that is finally changing, as the minds behind Warhammer have rolled out several stories and new canon in recent years, not only expanding the origins and character of the Emperor, but even laying the seeds for his eventual return to the setting, which makes it more important than ever for fans to know who the Emperor was before he was the Emperor, and where his story really began. Ironically, the beginning of Warhammer's grim darkness of the far future actually begins in the year 8000 BC, right here on Earth. With the end of the last ice age, the era of humans was beginning, with most on the planet still making their way in hunter-gatherer societies, and the idea of pottery or painting on cave walls still years away. But most importantly, small groups of humans were beginning to settle in villages, and it was one such settlement located in ancient Turkey which witnessed the birth of humanity's future. This young boy would soon go by the name Neoth, and at first didn't seem any different at all. But in classic comic book superhero fashion, with age came superpowers and the revelation that he was actually a higher form of life than any of his fellow humans. As his gifts and awareness stirred, Neoth would experience visions of the truth of the universe, the past and present of the planet, and the greater powers at work in both the seen and unseen worlds. Later accounts would summarize this by calling Neoth the New Man, an evolutionary step forward from humans. But the boy would eventually learn he was among the first so-called perpetuals, a new form of human blessed with immortality along with a range of unique gifts and abilities. Given access to the knowledge, wisdom, and gifts of hundreds of generations of seers, psychics, and shamans from humanity's past, Neoth was cosmically enlightened. His fellow humans had yet to understand the nature of the stars in the sky, but he now comprehended the cosmic forces which governed them. Now, if this is sounding eerily similar to the story of Paul Atreides, Neoth's resemblance to the hero of Doom is not an accident. And understanding how Paul ingested the blue water of life to gain past memories gives a clearer sense of Warhammer's own Emperor. But where Paul could see all possible futures and identify the one narrow way for humans to survive, Neoth saw something different. To put it simply, he envisioned the future of humanity which would take place, stretching from the first murder through to our modern day and thousands upon thousands of years still to come, perhaps even including events well beyond the year 40,000. To answer the biggest question, no. The exact reason or explanation for Neoth's birth, if there is one, isn't officially known. Warhammer lore has offered multiple possible answers, and the Emperor is in no condition to set the record straight. Not that he even would if he could. But if his own allies don't think the why or how of him is that important, then we don't need to worry about it either. What is important is that as civilization spread across the globe in the centuries and millennia to come, the immortal Neoth moved with it, witnessing, guiding, or manipulating world history to advance humanity one step at a time. Eventually encountering other perpetuals he could ally to his cause, it was Neoth alone who possessed the foresight to guide his actions, along with the ego to believe that only he could lead the way. Able to affect how others saw his physical appearance or qualities, it's implied his actions may have even been the origin of mythological figures like Gilgamesh through Hercules, historical conquerors like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, or even world-changing thinkers like Plato or Socrates. His travels and adventures remain more a matter of legend than real historical account, and that is exactly how he wants to keep it. But before arriving in our own modern age, the future Emperor would take a step back from the spotlight. Having successfully helped humanity rise from building pyramids to building space shuttles, he took on a new, far more secretive work, leaving the next several millennia for humanity to enter its own unstoppable and potentially uncontrollable age of expansion. The rise of humanity in Warhammer's universe must first begin with significant knock to our ego, realizing that our own modern civilization has accomplished very little, according to the historians of the year 40,000. In fact, most of the human history we know today fails to even make it into that far-off future, for a very specific reason which we will get to shortly. But the survival of recognizable references, allusions, and even characters quoting the plays of Shakespeare are enough to confirm the future of Warhammer is intended to be our own, and it all begins for us in the next few centuries. Seeking an empire beyond planet Earth, or Terra as it will soon be known, humanity embarks upon a massive and seemingly unstoppable spread across space. First, the moon is colonized to become a new base for scientific, technological, and genetic research. Mars is terraformed and colonized soon after, becoming an unparalleled manufacturing center and Terra's most powerful industrial ally. Inhabitable or usable moons of Neptune, Jupiter, and Saturn follow as humanity prepares for its next leap forward beyond our solar system. It isn't until the year 15,000 that the true potential of artificial intelligence is unlocked. A race of smart and self-governing machine intelligence is crucial to human survival on distant worlds, allowing the successful launch of colony ships to begin their generations-long journeys to the nearest star systems, establishing new footholds for the next 2,000 years, at which point discovery of the warp occurs, thanks to the emergence of navigators, a new mutated form of human being able to sense safe paths through space. This would be humanity's first widespread exposure to a power or dimension beyond its own, but it sadly would not be the last. For the time being, though, the engineering of warp drives allowed for vast travel through a different layer of the universe, letting ships cover light years of real space in days, not centuries, and soon creating an even broader web of inhabited worlds across the Milky Way galaxy. Alien or Xenos races are encountered along the way, but simply flee or wither in the face of this godlike humanity, a new interstellar species spreading unchecked through its mastery of machines and weaponry. This will all come to be known as the Age of Technology by those who managed to survive it, and while we don't have evidence or artwork of just what this era actually looked like, we know that it's the highest heights achieved by a human civilization beyond anything our modern minds could understand. Where people in the ancient world had the lost city of Atlantis to revere as a society which had achieved something akin to science fantasy, the future residents of Warhammer in the year 40,000 similarly have this golden age of humanity to look back upon. But if all of this imagery and terminology is once again sounding an awful lot like the vast human empire of Dune, it was sadly the same unthinkable twist which brought this Gilded Age to a complete and sudden stop. Having been created to evolve humanity into its greatest form yet, the machines would revolt. We don't know exactly when, where, or why, but the Cybernetic Revolt, as it was officially dubbed, saw the machines of humanity turn against it, plunging all worlds and peoples across the cosmos into a brutal, catastrophic collapse. The war against AI would technically be won, meaning only that humans outlived the machines, but reality had forever changed, which is why this formerly glorious era would be renamed the Dark Age of Technology, and AIs, now known as abominable intelligences, were outlawed. Unfortunately, things were about to get even worse. As humanity reeled, with all of its grandeur and empire now teetering on the brink, the warp itself was suddenly thrown into total chaos, making travel or even communication between worlds impossible. Now, we know the reason for this, but at the time, humanity had no insight, understanding only that they were suddenly scattered, isolated, and abandoned, with humanity's golden age obviously and definitively over. For some of these separated worlds, they had amassed enough population, wealth, or technology to strengthen their borders against the darkness to come. For others, a specific genetic variation, culture, or simply hard stock meant the population was noble or moral enough to retain some sense of civilization, or brutal enough to go on fighting. But for the vast majority of humanity spread across a million different worlds, unstoppable descent into barbarism and chaos began. And those dark threats and predators of the universe, once scared off by humanity's strength in numbers, all returned to feast on a suddenly vulnerable species. Back on Terra, the cradle of the human race, things are no different. Officially starting in the year 25,000 and lasting for the next 5,000 years, the darkest age of humanity begins in what will eventually be referred to as Old Night. With even the other worlds of the solar system left to fend for themselves, a curtain of darkness around Terra effectively divided its people from the billions being lost light years away. And as barbaric and brutal warlords rose to carve new nations and empires onto the planet's surface, every shred of evidence that Terra had once been the center of an interstellar empire of gods was reduced to rubble. Where humanity had once reached the pinnacle of its race, in this post-apocalyptic landscape, the techno-barbarians emerged. But with all the promise of humanity seemingly lost, a small group found refuge deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, led by a single man who, as humanity thrived for endless millennia, planned for the worst. Whether it was a future that he had specifically seen or one he anticipated, This man had gathered and safeguarded strongholds of ancient and immortal wisdom, science, and genetic research. Humanity's first golden age may have been over, but the future that Neoth saw for the human race was about to begin. It's here that we arrive at a major turning point in the timeline, as someone could reasonably argue that Warhammer's version of humanity effectively begins in the year 28,000. Because while we understand the true beginnings of the species, the characters don't. And the previous form of humanity is as good as myth, with all knowledge and science of the Golden Age completely lost. Well, not entirely lost. When the long night began, warring armies, nations, and leaders of Terra scrambled to gather as much Golden Age information and technology as possible, whether or not they could fully understand it themselves. Relying on whatever genetic or military technology that they could grab, the wonders of humanity were twisted into mockeries of their achievements. And no power was greater than the mastery of the human body. Discovery of the warp and AI had allowed mankind to travel the stars, but it was genetic augmentation which allowed us to survive, even thrive, on alien worlds. Stripped of this knowledge to manipulate human genes, they could only mutate them, crudely transforming soldiers or slaves into half-human, half-machine monstrosities. With survival and domination the only priorities for what few empires remained, nobody seemed to notice as the most brilliant thinkers, scientists, geneticists, or leading minds began to disappear, recruited in secret to join one man's cause. It needs to be pointed out that while he's best known for his appearance as a warrior, an emperor, and even a god, what sets Neoth apart is that he was above all else a scientist, and having lived through the Golden Age himself, he understood what secrets humanity had unlocked. With the most brilliant minds gathered at his side, he would create the perfect super soldiers with which to lead his new empire. No, not the Space Marines. His first and greatest genetic creation, the golden-clad giants of his Legio Custodes, led by their first and greatest member, the legendary Constantine Valdor. With centuries, even millennia to engineer these transhuman knights, the Custodes, or Custodians, joined Neoth as a personal guard, emerging from his Himalayan fortress from total obscurity to become the single most important person in the universe. For an everyday mercenary at this time, killing for coin and augmenting their body to survive or compete in the hellscape that Terra had become, the incoming change began as nothing more than whispers. Tales of a new warlord said to possess impossible powers, leading an army of unkillable, superhuman warriors. A tyrant king waging war not just for riches or territory, but marching, conquering, and reshaping one kingdom, one realm, one empire at a time, crossing entire continents, then what used to be entire oceans with seemingly no end in sight. He would be known simply as Imperator, and under his rule, chaos would become order. Ignorance would become enlightenment. Vanquished enemy champions were soon transformed to become his own vanguard, genetically augmented and armored to act as the tip of the spear. No, still not Space Marines. The more brutal, less refined, but just as mighty Thunder Warriors. Rolling across the surface of the world like their namesake, growing stronger as the realm expanded, this new leader's total control of Terra soon became an inevitability. But even in this conquest, Neoth demonstrated a unique greatness, achieving victory through more than simple warfare or brute force. When enemies did demonstrate honor or a desire for order, he could win them to his cause through diplomacy, as his vision for a united human race was, understandably, hard to resist. It was not until these unification wars were finally complete, and all of Terra's nations, warbands, and empires were pledged to his rule, that this godlike figure finally revealed the true scale of his intentions, taking the throne and title of the Emperor of Mankind, officially ending the Age of Strife, putting a close to the Old Night, and finally giving humanity a chance at recapturing a glimmer of its former glory. Now, for anyone who might wonder if the defeated people might tell a different story, or simply have a different perspective, that is a bias which the Warhammer 40k canon writers are very much aware of. This seems as good a point as any to make it clear that this account of history, legend, and tradition is the version which the Emperor allows to survive into the future of the Warhammer 40k universe. A story which depicts the Emperor as a mighty savior pulling humanity out of ignorance definitely serves his purpose, which means that readers looking for other tales of these glorious unification wars simply won't find them. And this really is another outstanding aspect of the Warhammer 40k lore. It isn't written in a vacuum. Where other franchises or fictional universes might have gaps in the timeline or canon because they simply haven't been written yet, historians of Warhammer 40k are largely employed and assigned by the future Imperium, meaning which stories they choose to tell and how they choose to tell them are part of the larger story itself. It's the main reason that the 2019 novel Valdor: Birth of the Imperium by Chris Wright has become a must-read for fans, being set at this exact moment in the timeline and offering a rare chance to dig into the deception, the secrecy, and the admittedly shameful compromises that the Emperor deemed necessary to save humanity. That includes explaining why the mighty Thunder Warriors, which helped win him Earth, mysteriously disappear, replaced by a new evolution of super soldier, specifically engineered to fight a war for the Emperor thousands of years in the making. As we now approach the year 30,000, the recorded history known to residents of the Warhammer 40k universe really begins, with infinitely more concrete knowledge, novels, video games, and lore existing from this point forward. If the current setting of Warhammer is set in the year 40k, then we're now officially talking about the prequel era of the franchise. Having finally revealed himself to humanity as its superhuman, immortal, psychically powered, and glorious all-knowing leader, the Emperor, as he can now rightly be referred to, immediately set about creating a new civilization with his most ambitious plan yet. As the warp storm separating a million human worlds from one another suddenly disappeared, for reasons that once again had nothing to do with humanity, the Emperor could finally look out from Terra. What he saw were billions upon billions of human lives abandoned to unthinkable brutality and ignorance, somehow still surviving in the void, but increasingly preyed upon by aliens, demons, and all manner of monsters both within and without, which meant he would need to move quickly. But to execute his Great Crusade, the Emperor would require an army unlike any that had existed before. Fortunately, he had spent several centuries preparing for this demand, and commanded the world's most advanced gene scientists to make it possible. Thanks to the brilliant work of one such scientist, named Amar Astarte, normal human recruits could be transformed into near-immortal demigods, blessed with extra organs and enhanced bodies and minds through a complicated medical procedure, an evolution of the Thunder Warriors which had preceded them. But where the Thunder Warriors were made to destroy and conquer through brute strength, the Emperor needed soldiers who could build. Still deadly in combat, but more precise, refined, and most importantly, awe-inspiring. Since these soldiers would likely be the actual way distant human worlds would, let's say, meet the Imperium, they would also function as propaganda, embodying the undeniable greatness of the Emperor's crusade. While they were still no comparison to the Custodes, these soldiers could still split the difference between that perfection and the limitations of regular human beings. Keeping the Latin naming system alive, these Legiones Astartes legions, or simply Astartes, could be engineered by the hundreds and soon thousands, destined to become better known across the cosmos as the iconic Space Marines. With the manufacturing and forges of Mars pushed into overdrive, the Emperor soon constructed an interstellar armada to unify the galaxy, just as he had achieved on Terra. Numbering thousands of warships and legions of more than 1 million Space Marines, and backed by an even larger force of human infantry, the sheer scale of the Great Crusade is truly mind-boggling. But the Emperor could still not be everywhere at once, and had a solution to that problem as well. He would genetically engineer not 1, not 10, but 20 sons instilled with his own greatness, each command an army of their own. Forget the word superhuman. These demigod-like children would grow to become the Primarchs, humanity's new pantheon of imperial gods, and Warhammer 40k's most loved and hated characters. Not to exaggerate, but if you're not already falling in love with 40k, then the brilliant creation of the Primarchs should do the trick, because what happens next is likely the franchise's most brilliant twist. Apparently, the Emperor's enemies realize this too, stealing these Primarch babies from the Emperor's grasp and teleporting them across the galaxy to unknown worlds he had yet to reclaim. Having been genetically engineered from the Emperor himself, these children were strong enough to survive, but their fates were no longer in the hands of their father, now launching his massive campaign with a new mission to find his lost sons. Some of whom had been lucky enough to appear in a paradise granted a royal upbringing, while others were abandoned to survive in the wild. Each Primarch would be uniquely shaped by their new homeworld's culture, dress, weaponry, and warrior virtues, or lack thereof. Each with their own gifts, their own morality, and their own origin story, all compelling enough for their own blockbuster film franchise. I need to make it clear here that the genius of this story beat honestly can't be understated, since it gives each of the Primarchs infinitely more character and complexity than most fantasy or sci-fi royalty even attempts. Imagine Anakin Skywalker's entire storyline playing out, witnessing his fall into becoming Darth Vader, only for his actual father to come bursting into the room, revealing himself as a godlike king of the universe, finally here to recruit his son to the infinitely larger mission he was actually created for. Would he still be a villain? Or just a lost orphan who did what he needed to survive and unlock his potential? What kind of son or brother would he become? That is the story of each and every Primarch. As the Crusades spread, the Primarchs were found one by one, informed of their true nature and introduced to their very own legion of superhuman space marines. As these lost Primarch sons of the Emperor had grown to maturity across space, it was these soldiers, transformed by their Primarch's own genetic code on Terra, who had been searching for them all along. An entire army made up of sons of their own, desperate to win the approval and bring glory to their individual gene sires. Again, the storylines here are almost too incredible to explain, so hopefully calling out one example can make the point clear. The fatherless Ninth Legion. The Emperor's most ferocious soldiers in the early stages of the Great Crusade, these Astartes were infamous for turning battlefields into bloodbaths, not just defeating their enemies, but consuming their blood and hearts. Now, while we would recognize them as vampires, this Revenant Legion was still effective for the Emperor, if horrifying. But it would take the return of their Primarch, Sanguinius, the most glorious and noble of all of the Emperor's sons, to save them from damnation. Seeing what curse his own gene seed had caused in these sons, Sanguinius embraced the Legion with his angelic wings, granted through random or not so random mutation, allowing this legion to be transformed. Defined by a new, devout resistance of their bloodlust, these tortured souls were reborn to become the Emperor's most glorious knights, the legendary Blood Angels. A little on the nose, sure, but why be subtle when you can be awesome? Every new fan of Warhammer comes to know the incredible deeds of all of the Primarchs and their legions. How the proud Rabute Gilliman and his franchise mascot Ultramarines united an empire of 500 worlds. How the noble Jagatai Khan forged his white scars into a cavalry of legend, riding motorcycles, not horses. How the mighty Lion led an order of knights that would make King Arthur jealous. And how countless other Primarchs lived a life's worth of adventures as the Crusade reconnected humanity. Wars were waged and epic sagas were written, literally in a standalone series of novels starring each Primarch, all defining the glorious era of Warhammer 30k. But it was Horus, the first son to return and train at his father's side, who would become the greatest of them all. And it was Horus entrusted to lead his father's crusade and command his brother Primarchs, who would learn the terrible secret his father had kept from the world for over 30,000 years, the true nature of the warp. The dimension which granted humanity passage across the universe, the connection it formed with an increasing number of mutating psychics, and the evil which now reached out to twist or torment distant worlds, were all part of something much greater: chaos. A dark plane of existence inhabited by horrible, malicious gods and demons, both the source and embodiment of all that is evil, twisted, and deranged, and the greatest threat humanity could ever imagine. But the darkest secret of them all? The Emperor had not only drawn from these dark powers, but directly bargained with these very chaos gods to create his own Primarch sons, and the mighty army they now commanded. An unseen enemy that sought to invade, seduce, and corrupt all the Emperor had built, and they would begin with Horus himself. Can't be overstated that the Horus Heresy, as it would soon be called, is the main event of the Warhammer 40k universe, completely redefining the story and setting from that point onward. It's Middle-earth's War of the Ring, it's the Clone Wars to the Star Wars movies, Terminator's Judgment Day, or whatever franchise-defining fictional event you want to compare it to. And since the full story of the Heresy ballooned up to almost 100 devoted Warhammer novels, we're going to keep things very brief. In short, Horus was corrupted and empowered by the Chaos Gods to betray the Emperor. Children don't need a lot of reasons to be mad at their parents in the best circumstances, but by creating his sons to achieve his goals, several of the Primarchs joined Horus in rebellion. It's still important to note that Warhammer doesn't draw a simple line here between good and bad, as some of these traitor Primarchs were actually deceived, mistreated, fearful, or just longed for an empire of their own. while others did embrace chaos, allowing themselves and their sons to be corrupted into walking nightmares. Whatever their motivations, the war tore a path across the rebuilt Imperium to the Emperor's palace on Terra, with billions of civilians and multiple Primarchs killed, before Horus finally came face to face with his father. A fight which nearly killed the Emperor, but utterly obliterated Horus, sending his fellow traitors fleeing. With their father's body and spirit shattered, his loyal remaining sons installed him upon his golden throne. Not just a chair, but a machine which halted his death, using what little power Neoth still possessed to protect humanity from the forces of chaos. When the dust of the heresy settled, the glory of the Emperor was snuffed out, his dream was ruined, and in the months and years that followed, the sons he had made to save the Imperium were, in one way or another, lost. The result was a grim new status quo for the setting, which was to remain unchanged for the next 10,000 years. Last, we arrive at the doomed future which originally launched the entire setting and major plot points of the Warhammer 40k game and universe. A fallen empire in a permanent state of war against humans, Xenos, heretics, mutants, and agents of chaos. As a wise man once said, death is just the moment when the dying ends. And if that's true, then the Imperium of Mankind is still very much alive. Its light has faded, however, replaced with brutal and ever-suspicious organizations seeking and cutting out any perceived threats, blurring the line between good and evil to somehow keep a million-world civilization together through sheer force of administration and bureaucracy. With billions now worshipping the unseen emperor as a protecting god, and the traitors waging millennia-long campaigns against their former Space Marine brothers, any remaining heroes are forced to run at breakneck speed, fueled by a galaxy of human misery just to stay in the same place. It's the reason for Warhammer 40k's famous slogan that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And that may never change. It literally created the word grimdark. But the modern setting is now experiencing several major game-changing twists that fans have waited decades to witness. Rabute Gilliman has returned to not only lead but strengthen and advance his father's empire with a new crusade to retake what's been lost. His Ultramarines have a new mission to reconquer the 500 worlds of Ultramar, making the Space Marine game protagonist Titus one of the most important heroes alive. And the Lion himself is returning in Dawn of War 4. Not to mention the launch of a new edition of the tabletop game and reports suggesting the Imperium's belief in the Emperor might finally be paying off after 10 millennia of prayer power. All of which, thanks to the lore covered in this video, you are now ready to dive into, hopefully given enough context to confidently feed your own curiosity. Scouring the wiki to uncover the vast canon of heroes serving the Astra Militarum, the Inquisition, or even the Chaos Gods. Or maybe switching sides to join the Orcs, yes, space Orcs, piloting asteroids jam-packed with their warriors into one planet after another. All those and more will be explored in future videos, so be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and make sure to post any questions or ideas for further lore dives in the comments below. Until then, remember the wisdom of the Emperor's own librarians. Knowledge is power, so guard it well.